I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our 2018 update podcast, where we're just going to be catching up with a few things, some of them quite long-standing things, that still are at a loose end in earlier podcasts. Now, breaking with tradition somewhat, we're going to be going backwards in order of podcast release, which means we begin with a couple more words about Thundercats, which was a podcast we did very recently. We discussed in our Thundercats podcast, when appropriate, not in huge detail, the new Thundercats, and we mentioned them all by name, Palmyra, Linkso, and Bengali. But I realised listening back to the podcast, we'd said more about Palmyra and Linkso than we had about Bengali, and I thought there were perhaps a couple of things worth saying about him. What I personally find particularly memorable about Bengali is that he was the one new Thundercat I was actually aware of when I was little, because I remember seeing his action figure in the Argos catalogue and thinking, perhaps saying, oh, a white Tigra variant. Why would anybody want a white Tigra variant? If I were collecting Thundercats figures, I'd want the proper Tigra. And little did I realise that it was actually supposed to be a different character.
Well, it wouldn't have been surprising, would it, given that Sewer Crawling Splinter, who we were talking about, has like a silver jacket, and they just do make weird-looking versions of action figures.
Yeah, that's right. It was a thought that even though it isn't actually true, it would have rung true with how action figures were released at the time. And yes, as you say, it's reminded you of Sewer Crawling Splinter. It reminded me of how some of the Masters of the Universe action figures are specifically designed just to reuse old molds. For example, Stinkor is just a repainted Merman, and Mothman in the original toy line is just something to do with the Beastman mold, a bit different. So yes, that thought about the Bengali action figure did actually sum up how these merchandising campaigns and action figures were come into being. And even though technically Bengali isn't, as a character, just a white tiger, he is from a merchandising point of view, really. So that's why I think Bengali does sum up the whole 80s action figure merchandise cartoon phenomenon in many ways.
It's funny that they were selling it in Argos but not showing the episodes on TV. Maybe the Argos buyers didn't realise that it wasn't a white Tigra themselves.
It also wasn't mentioned on the Thundercats podcast that Bengali was voiced by Peter Newman, which makes him very like Tigra as well, because he's just sort of Tigra with a slightly softer voice. And of course Tigra does acknowledge it, I think, in Thundercats So the movie, by calling him brother, thus acknowledging that, yeah, these are both Tigra-type Thundercats variants of. But of course, one thing I always remember about Rosie discovering the name of Bengali was something she said about why it's not a clever name, even if it's trying to be.
It doesn't really bother me now. I suppose when one is young, one does get pedantic over things, but it's not the case that Bengal tigers are white tigers. Most tigers are orange, and any species of tiger can just turn out white. And it's just a kind of genetic mutation kind of a thing, and I'd perhaps been reading about that in a magazine or a book about tigers or something around the time I learned of Bengali, because I do remember reading about it and seeing a picture of a white tiger and an orange tiger, but it doesn't really worry me now, although it may be a little misleading for children. It might make them think, oh, a white tiger, that must be a Bengal tiger then.
Yes, it could have given misinformation to the young audience quite unintentionally, and perhaps it did to some of them. So a point worth mentioning and thinking about there, I thought, and that's why we have done so. Going back a little further to our podcast about The Mummy, and thinking about The Mummy, the animated series. Now, at the beginning of 2018, just after our The Mummy podcast was released, I did a series of scores and reviews on the Internet Movie Database for all the episodes of The Mummy, the animated series, and then a little later in the year, in the summer, I did commentaries for all the episodes, which you can find elsewhere on my channel, if you feel so inclined. But what I found particularly interesting and wanted to mention in an update podcast is when I was doing the scores for the episodes when I reviewed them on the movie database. The movie database demands that things be scored out of 10, and I did find it quite an interesting experience scoring the 26 episodes of The Mummy out of 10. And I just wanted to mention on this update podcast something about those scores, because it does rather back up what was said on the Mummy podcast, I think, about the differing quality and peaks and troughs in the two different seasons of the show. There's nothing I hate more than having statistics quoted at me in order to try and prove a point.
There are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Exactly, so I think you have to be very careful with how you use statistics, but in this case, I think the mean, median, and mode scores that I did of my episode scores for the two series do actually make quite a valid point. So I am going to quote them, much as it may annoy you. Mean, median, and mode is something we were made to do at school, the three different types of average, and actually they can be quite interesting to compare things in different ways. Taking my scores for the first series of The Mummy, the mean score was 8.3, whereas taking my scores for the second series of The Mummy, Secrets of the Magi, the mean score was 6.1, which I thought was quite a good average score in both cases, and backed up what I was saying about the overall quality being better in season 1. The median and mean are often quite similar when you work out these things, and they are quite similar in this case. My median score for the first series was 8, and my median score for the second series, Secrets of the Magi, was 6. So again, I think that summed it up rather well. But I did find the modes particularly interesting, and here is where we come back to peaks and troughs. My mode score for the first series turned out to be 8, but then for the second series, Secrets of the Magi, I actually have 4 separate modes, each of which I gave twice. The 4 modes are 4, 5, 6, and 10, and I think that sums up my feeling about Secrets of the Magi perfectly. A lot of them hanging around in the middle, being very average, not as good as the first season, 4, 5, 6, but then a couple of them being my absolute peaks of the whole series, and that's why 10 got in there as well. And then I do find the second series rather hit and miss, which is why I gave the other scores once each. I gave a 2, a 3, a 7, an 8, and a 9. So I think that does rather nicely sum up my feelings about The Mummy the Animated Series overall. And just in case you're curious, the mean for the whole series was 7.2, the median was 8, and the modes were 8 and 10, which I also thought summed up my overall feelings quite nicely. And that's that done, so we needn't be blinded with any more statistics in this particular podcast. Next on the list, going back in time over podcasts we've done, is Jurassic Park, or more specifically, the 5th film in the Jurassic Park franchise, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which Rosie went to see in the cinema in June 2018, and I elected to wait until I was going to give Rosie the DVD for Christmas and see that. And, well, I'm not sorry I did so, quite frankly. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom hasn't really made much impression on me now that I have actually watched it. I thought it was really just a series of over-the-top throwaway dramatic sequences, one after the other, featuring a lot of very forgettable characters that I didn't really engage with at all, and I just haven't taken a lot of feelings away from it one way or the other. But I think Rosie has some more interesting things to say about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
When I watched it in the cinema, and then I came back and Jake said, "Did you enjoy it?" I said, "Bits of it." There were also a lot of bits I didn't enjoy. And before I watched the DVD the other day, having got it for Christmas from Jake, I couldn't remember what those bits were. But really, I suppose it was the dinosaur bits. I do quite like the Indoraptor. The plot, though, there are some things wrong with it, and if you read or listen to anyone who works on this new trilogy being interviewed about it, they'll say, oh well, we had to move things along and get the dinosaurs into the wider world because you can't keep thinking of reasons why intelligent people would go back to the island. They always say the island. I don't know whether it's because they don't realise there's a second island or because they're trying so very hard not to alienate the portion of the audience who hates the second island and would refuse to go to the cinema if it were acknowledged in this latest lot of movies. Now, in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, as probably everyone's picked up from trailers and things, there's an active volcano that, as Jake was saying, would have been very annoying if the theme park had still been running and successful, so that the island and any dinosaurs left on it are destroyed, which is something I do object to. It's very presumptuous of these new writers to come along and say, yep, this is what we're going to do to Isla Nublar. It's an iconic film setting, and they've just given themselves the green light to destroy it. But then, of course, if that's going to happen, you need to acknowledge Isla Sorna. If it were real, if you were thinking of moving the dinosaurs, you'd say, oh, let's take them to Isla Sorna. You wouldn't be saying, when this volcano erupts, all the dinosaurs are going to be extinct. Someone would say, except the ones on Isla Sorna. There's no acknowledgement of it at all. But then, of course, they keep the portion of the audience that doesn't want Isla Sorna, and the portion that do, they can make up their own excuses for why they don't mention it. And indeed they have, as Jake was reading one day.
Yes, indeed, a theory about how Isla Sorna is also volcanically active, and so it would be silly to move the dinosaurs there, which makes enough in-universe sense if it satisfies you as the reason. What I did find interesting about the tie-in web stuff to go with the release of the movie this time, which was the Dinosaur Protection Group website, which was one of many aspects that I thought was rather glossed over in the final cut of the film, actually, the Dinosaur Protection Group. But they made sure there to mention Isla Sorna and say, or at least imply, that dinosaurs had been taken from Isla Sorna to help to populate the new Jurassic World on Isla Nublar. But putting it there in the tie-in online material isn't really enough. It needs to be properly incorporated into the whole film universe, actually in the films themselves, in my opinion. But as you say, they don't want to alienate viewers who don't want that.
I do wonder if they're going to mention it in the final film, when everyone's bought their cinema ticket, or if they're not going to, because in fact not everyone will have bought their cinema ticket, and those that have will say, don't go, they mention Isla Sorna. Maybe they'll never acknowledge it. I hope they do. But yes, glossed over the Dinosaur Protection Group. The whole explosion, it's all very arbitrary, and this is why I doubly object to it. I don't like them destroying the island and the dinosaurs. And apart from that, they didn't need to. It's a plot catalyst to get a load of dinosaurs to the Lockwood estate and get the human protagonists to help them. I think it was a lazy way to get the dinosaurs there and to get Toby Jones selling them, and that's what the plot is. And the Dinosaur Protection Group and the volcano and all that kind of thing, it's not mentioned anymore because there's not really anything else to say about it, is there? We're doing something else now. We're bringing the dinosaurs to the mainland and we're selling them and they're getting out. So it mainly takes place in this mansion. And I don't know, it's okay. I quite like seeing the dinosaurs going around, killing people, knocking down walls, whatever they're doing. That's what I liked about the first film, I suppose, when I was 8. I wasn't really very interested in what the people were doing. I just wanted to see the dinosaurs. So, I don't know, it's okay. I still find it engaging. So I wouldn't want to not have the DVD and have the incomplete set. I'm not gagging for the next one, though, like I was previously.
I was interested to be told on one of the Jurassic Park YouTube videos I've been watching with some interest that Steven Spielberg and his production company have had the right to make 6 movies for all this time, and that's why they have eventually come back and made this second trilogy. So I wonder what, if anything, after the third and final Jurassic World movie anyone will want to do with the franchise. Hopefully just leave it alone, perhaps.
Nothing ever gets left alone now, though, does it? Perhaps after a decent interval there'll be a remake or a reboot or whatever. Or a re-adaptation. Of course, it's based on a book, and quite shortly I'm going to object to people calling new adaptations of books remakes. In this case, I do feel that the movies are a lot better than the books, and that's my opinion, and it's a bit of a hypocritical one.
Yes, I think some Jurassic Park book fans would like to see a less family-friendly, more extremely gory, like Michael Crichton's original book version of Jurassic Park on screen. So that's maybe something some filmmakers might like to consider after Steven Spielberg makes the sixth film and loses the rights to the franchise.
And I can't object to that because it ties in very much with what I'm going to say about our next topic.
I was moved to remark something along the lines of, what a pity they didn't make this 10 years ago, and then they could have had Richard Attenborough being John Hammond as the old guy in the wheelchair, rather than this new character who's supposedly his original partner. That's in both Jurassic World films now. We've met a new character who claims to have been working with John Hammond behind the scenes ages ago, and dies in that movie. There'll probably be a third one in the third Jurassic World movie. But one returning actor we did get in a cameo at the beginning and the end was Jeff Goldblum as Ian Malcolm, and I think that lifted the film quite a bit. I was very pleased that he was obviously making the conscious effort to come back and play the same character, rather than just sit there in the courtroom scenes and read out these lines as Jeff Goldblum. And I think he captured that Ian Malcolm essence in those two quite small scenes very well. So that was probably my favourite aspect of the film.
Yes, I agree with that. You can always count on Jeff Goldblum, and he does care about the movie series and the franchise. You can tell from the way he talked about it on the Graham Norton show.
So there we are. The jury's out on a final verdict on the Jurassic Park film series 6 movies version, and at the end of 2021 we'll all be a little wiser about how that's gone and have some final thoughts to share about it, I'm sure. But in the meantime, let's move on to the next item on the list, Watership Down. The BBC and Netflix did, as we were hoping on our previous update podcast, finally pull their fingers out and get their new adaptation of Watership Down shown / made available in the case of Netflix over Christmas 2018. And the first thing that anyone really noticed about it in all the previews was that it looked like absolute crap. The graphics and animation were terrible, and it reminded me of when I would play Harry Potter computer games, early Harry Potter computer games in the early 2000s, and a lot of comments online seem to agree with me that was the kind of graphics it was using, which is surprising to see at this point in the proceedings. However, that wouldn't have mattered if the show had been brilliant. It wouldn't even have been worth mentioning. But of course it wasn't brilliant, and I'm sure Rosie has lots to tell us about why not, because she cares about Watership Down a great deal.
Let's get this out of the way. A lot of people have been calling it a remake. All of them, or nearly all of them, undoubtedly people who are too lazy to read the book. And I object to that, and if there is a new adaptation of Jurassic Park, I won't be calling it a remake. Now, you might hear me say things like, it's pointless Disney remaking their own movies and that kind of thing, but where the source material is a book, you can make as many adaptations as you want, and you can always do something a bit different, and you can still be true to the book, and you should be true to the book, is my opinion. With the exception of Jurassic Park, where I don't like the book. And there are a lot of fans of the book who actually dislike the 1978 movie. Rushed is a word that I have seen used to describe it. I wouldn't go as far as rushed, but it is true that important details are missing due to time constraints, and I would have gone into all that on our Watership Down podcast, so I won't do it again. Which means that what this production had the opportunity to do was go into all that detail, get the plot points in the right order, and go into them more fully. And that's what I and other fans of the book, and possibly the film, wanted to see. And we did not get to see that. It was an absolute travesty. And yes, it is ugly. Now, I don't know how far £20 million goes, and people say, well, you can't expect Pixar standards. They have budgets in 9 figures, don't they? But you would think you could spend some of that money making it look a bit less ugly. And a lot of people have been tweeting the rabbits look more like hares, and then a couple of people said, I think whoever designed all this accidentally used a jackrabbit as their reference, and goodness me, that's probably true if it was a North American animation company, because in American media, hare and rabbit often are used interchangeably. They just don't seem to know the difference, and I don't want to be racist and say no Americans know the difference between hares and rabbits, but evidently a lot of those involved in the media do not know, and that's a shame. But as Jake said, I could overlook that if the adaptation were any good, but it wasn't. The main thing, apart from all the changes, which I'll go into a little bit, was the characterisation. Hazel, apart from scrabbling around after the approval of a couple of different does, one of whom is Clover, doesn't have the power of leadership. People make decisions without him. He gets bullied and badgered into doing things. He just doesn't say the supportive, encouraging, sensible things that the character should say that give him the power of leadership, in spite of him not being the strongest or the smartest, as they call it, the cleverest, as Richard Adams called it, or the psychic one. Which reminds me, they're on about Blackberry being the smartest, but what makes him so smart in this adaptation? There's no boat for him to suggest getting onto during the escape from Ephrafa, which is a huge omission. Clover knows how to open the rabbit hutch and tells Hazel. Hazel works out for himself to dig out the peg when Bigwig's in the snare. So what's Blackberry actually done? He's told everybody to get on a dustbin lid, which ought to have been driftwood, running away from the Sandalford owlsler, which ought to have been a dog loose in the wood that might pick up their scent. Pipkin's not even in it. Bluebell is the other small one besides Fiver. He's also the storyteller. Well, that's supposed to be Dandelion. Dandelion's injured, so he can't even use his speed to lure the dog to Watership Down, although Hazel can with his injured back leg. I haven't mentioned Bigwig, have I? I was just watching someone doing a review on YouTube, and I agreed with nearly everything he said, although there were some details about the book that he wasn't sure on. But one thing he pointed out was that Bigwig was only ever angry in this adaptation. And in the book and in the 1978 film, in which the characterisation is on point, Bigwig can get angry, he's rough around the edges, but there's much more to him than that, and he's much more sensible. Kee-Haw, voiced by Peter Capaldi, all of a sudden after it was originally supposed to be available. They made us wait an extra year for this pile of balls. So they must have, I'm sure, got the other guy, what's his name?
Kaivan Novak, and what we really knew him from was voicing Brains on the newer version of Thunderbirds.
Yeah, him. They must have got him to record the dialogue, because for months and months he was in the cast as Kee-Haw, up until, as I said, after it was supposed to go out. They must have decided for some reason they didn't like it, so they got Peter Capaldi, and goodness knows what was wrong, in their opinion, with the other lot of lines, but they would have been from the same script anyway, and whoever said them, they were going to be wrong, because Kee-Haw's just a dick. He doesn't build any relationship with the rabbits. He doesn't really help them that much. He turns up and attacks Woundwort towards the end, okay. But why? He doesn't seem to like them. He doesn't seem to want to help them. It doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, attempting to make more of the female characters, which I think you could do without changing the story. You could have a bit more focus on Ephrafa. You could have some scenes in Ephrafa with Eisenflay and her contemporaries mixed in with what the Bucks from Sandalford are doing. But no, they don't do that. They make Strawberry a woman who comes from Cowslip's Warren, rather pointlessly. The fact that she's female, it doesn't really add anything. She doesn't stand up as a strong female character. They do more with Clover, and they do too much with Clover. And she ends up getting taken off to Ephrafa, which is totally unprecedented. There are a lot of pointless action sequences. My goodness, trying to get Clover and friends out of the hutch. They end up inside the house, the conservatory. I think they're going through the cat flap. Everyone ends up going upstairs and jumping out of windows. It was absolutely horrendous. And other changes were made, and I've probably said very nearly everything that's worth saying. And, there's things like, instead of Hazel getting caught by the cat on the farm and being brought back to Watership Down in a hoodoo, it's Fiver. What is the point of that? Where I thought it did have some potential, I'll say this, is I thought Fiver's voice suited him, and I think they cast Fiver very well in the 1978 movie with Richard Dreyers and in the TV cartoon series that we talked about, which began in 1999. They seem to generally cast Fiver well. Unfortunately, the actor Nicholas Hoult had such rubbish to work with. I did have a glimmer of hope not far into it before we got onto all the messing about on the farm, in the house, Holly and some others going off to Ephrafa without Hazel knowing anything about it. That's another thing. Before Keehar turned up, before anything went hideously wrong. And that was Cowslip's Warren, where, because of time constraints, there's a lot missing from the 1978 film. And it was okay, because they went into things like the ritual greeting dance and their shape, although it was the wrong shape, which is kind of like rabbit art, and going and getting the flay rot and all that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, maybe it's not that bad. They've got the idea of this, but then it did make me think, actually, they do this better in the cartoon series. And the cartoon series has its own problems, of course. The problem with that bit being that they find Cowslip's Warren after they've already set up home on Watership Down, so there's no point saying, oh wow, look at this is brilliant. There's even less point saying, let's stay here. But then after that, it very quickly deteriorated, and I absolutely hated it. And a lot of opinions on the internet are the same. Most of them are, it looked like crap, couldn't they have spent a bit more of their £20 million making it look nicer than that? A few people liked it. Most people are saying it was no good. And I'm glad about that, and I hope that everyone involved gets to learn of this and feels thoroughly ashamed. They made us wait all that time, and it was hideous. It was absolutely horrible. And I'm so disappointed, because I really wanted to see a lengthy, true adaptation of the book. But I realise now there's no point wanting that. Nobody's ever going to make one. And the best thing to do is read the book.
Another thing that was being tweeted quite a lot after the first episode had been shown on the BBC, and in the days following, was they seem to have spent 19 million of their £20 million on the cast, and as you were saying, why couldn't they spend a bit more on the animation, people were saying. And I don't think really it was £19 million very well spent overall on the cast. There seemed to be a school of thought, and I do agree with it, that the voices weren't very distinct from each other. It was hard to tell who was supposed to be who, visually and orally.
It would have helped if they'd used each other's names a bit more, but they hardly ever did. That's a good thing in the 1978 movie. They address each other by name, and you get to learn who's who.
And I did think the voice acting, a lot of it overall, was very flat, and I'll mention the newer version of Thunderbirds again, because that was what I thought was the main problem with that. People don't really seem to be able to voice act anymore. They just kind of plop out the lines a lot of the time, and it sounds like they're reading. I guess Bigwig sounded like he was doing an acting performance, but all with one emotion, as you were saying. And as that video you mentioned that you were watching was saying as well, and it was quite right.
Yes, it dubbed over a little bit of the animation of Bigwig having a go, and it was saying, I'm Bigwig, I'm angry all the time. And it rang very true, actually.
Really, the main thing that these productions need, I think, to bring them to life is the right voice actors doing brilliant performances. And as has been mentioned before on these podcasts, cast with something in the vein of Eli Marienthal as Hogarth in The Iron Giant, or Chris Marquette as Alex O'Connell,
or Elliot Henderson Boyle as Pitkin in the cartoon series.
Yes, indeed. Performances like that really can make a show, no matter what the animation is like, or even if the script is a bit lacking in places. Some voice actors do make a lot more of it than others. And I think flat voice acting is a persistent problem nowadays, and I think Watership Down very much suffered from it.
Everyone was on and on about the cast. Oh wow, look at the stellar cast, such a star-studded cast. They're not any of them people I'm very keen on, actually, whether they're voice acting or screen acting. They're just people that you've heard of, and I guess some people might like them. But again, on YouTube or on blogs or whatever, people would just take one look at the cast and say, wow. But no, nothing really came across from many of them, although, as I said, Nicholas Hoult was the best of a bad bunch, and I think could have made more of some better material.
So there's something that was anticipated for a very long time and turned out to be extremely disappointing. The last item on the list was something we were anticipating seeing for a while as well, although not really looking forward to it or expecting it to be any good, and that was Ghostbusters 2016 movie. Ghostbusters was the second podcast we ever did way back in early 2016, and we mentioned that movie there, and have mentioned in updates since that we decided not to pay extra to watch it in the cinema or on movies on demand, but wait for it to come on the telly. And it came on the telly midway through December 2018. Channel 4 got it to show one Saturday night for their Saturday night movie, and we watched it and made our judgments, and it was very much as we expected, really. A typically unfunny 2010s movie, trying to be funny, trying to reboot something and pay homage and also have its own identity, and falling rather short on all counts. A movie that was interesting to see, but not really enjoyable to watch.
I didn't get any more or less interest or enjoyment out of it than I expected from the trailers. I suppose the story had some potential. Of course, with screenwriting being the way it is now, there was more kind of backstory and motivation behind what certainly one of the protagonists was doing. And I guess that was potentially quite interesting, although I don't think it's necessary if you do compare it to the original. They're just hunting ghosts because that's what they're interested in doing, and you don't need to have had a traumatic experience as a child or anything like that.
Yeah, we know in the original movie how and why it's important to Ray, Egon and Peter, and they don't need to bang on about it or, as you say, talk about their neighbours persistently haunting them when they were young. It's just all rather overdone nowadays.
I suppose what it didn't have was too much conflict between the protagonists. There was some to begin with. Oh, come back and help us hunt this ghost, Erin. Oh, no, I don't want to. My job at the university's on the line. But then they get over that and get on with it, and they do work well as a team. And actually, that's another gripe about Watership Down I got to mention. The conflict between the main characters goes on far too long, when it should have all ended after the snare at Cowslip's Warren. But anyway, back to Ghostbusters. Again, I found myself saying that would be funny if Keenan said it, didn't I, at one stage? Obviously, there's no point trying to make anything funny nowadays without Keenan. So maybe there was some potential there, but nothing that was potentially good about it really got me. I didn't engage with any of it, even if I didn't mind it, if you see what I mean. And then there were also things that were wrong with it, like the sexism. Now, I'm not objecting to female leads like a lot of people on the internet have been doing and saying, oh, it's just to try and be PC. The problem is we've gone back to sort of biblical writing, but the other way round, gender-wise. The women are the heroes and the characters with intelligence and integrity and motivation and interesting things going on. And the men, seriously, all of them in this film are either stupid yet pretty, as they call Kevin, or evil, just like in The Three Musketeers, just like in the Bible. As I said, not that I know the Bible that well, maybe I'm doing some injustice to some of the women in there, but it is a phenomenon that has been phased out over the years, and now in films like this it's happening at the expense of males, and I wouldn't want anyone to say I've got double standards. So I didn't approve of that, and if you flip the genders, if it was for men saying the kind of things that they were saying about Chris Hemsworth's character if he were a woman, it would be totally unacceptable. No one would have even put pen to paper and written it down, never mind gone through with making the movie.
We have to get him back. We'll never find the secretary so pretty. I mean, that is absolutely horrible. And really, it was so silly of the script to make a big thing of the four protagonists being women. I mean, why couldn't they just be four protagonists who were women and didn't have to go on about their bras and their queefs? That's what's sexist, I think, defining them as women rather than just four characters who are women.
I may have mentioned this on a podcast before, I'm not sure which one. The part of Ripley, Ellen Ripley, an alien, was originally written for a man. What these writers have to do, it seems, is just assume everyone's male to get proper characterization, and then if you cast women, everyone goes, oh wow, what a strong, compelling female protagonist. But if they know they're writing for women, then there it is. I mean, nobody pins their key, their door key, to their bra strap. What a load of absolute rubbish. If you get covered in slime or mud or whatever, you don't comment about how many orifices it's gone into. It's totally unrealistic apart from anything else.
I thought the idea of a human big boss antagonist being a kind of ghost master, controlling the ghosts, bringing them into our world, was ill-placed in this particular movie. Okay, it's an idea that can work in Ghostbusters. It's something that's gone into a bit in an episode of Extreme Ghostbusters. Not a particularly good episode, but an idea that is okay and appropriate there.
It's in Danny Phantom too.
Yes, indeed.
And it's got a name in that phenomenon. They call it ghost envy, so we use that term whenever anyone like this character appears in anything.
But rebooting a franchise with a new universe and going straight for there's a human ghost master and that's why these ghosts are here, I thought was a bit disappointing to have him there as part of the setup for why the Ghostbusters actually exist. And of course, human antagonists are used effectively in the original Ghostbusters movies. Walter Peck and good old Peter MacNicol as Janos Pohar in the second movie, being controlled by the ghost rather than him controlling the ghost. They're used very appropriately, human antagonists, in that way. But if you start off by saying a human is controlling ghosts and that's why there are Ghostbusters, I do find that rather a disappointing way to establish a new universe, Ghostbusters universe.
Of course, Walter Peck is a non-believer kind of antagonist, antagonising them in the human world, which works very well.
Speaking of Keenan, I was saying I wanted the character called Franklin in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom to be Keenan. And then he would have been funny, because he wasn't funny. But Keenan saying things like the blood from the Velociraptor get in his mouth and he knows the T-Rex is here and stuff would have been really amusing. And unfortunately, Keenan's too old to play that character, but I think it would have been well worth rethinking the whole character if Keenan would have been prepared to do it, but obviously nobody thought of that.
What did I want him to say in Ghostbusters? If I see twins from The Shining, I swear I'm going to pass out. That would have been really funny if Keenan had said it.
Yes, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman saying it, it matters that it's someone who makes lines like that really, really funny, which Keenan does, and I don't think any of the actors or actresses in the new Ghostbusters movie really managed to do anything with any of it.
Oh, you know who else I said would have made it funny? Regina Hall, of course.
Oh, yes! Oh, they should have had her. And another thing I was objecting to was some of the ghostbusting lore, which didn't only not fit in with established ghostbusting rules, which could work. It's a reboot, okay, but it seemed to be kind of at odds with the rules it was already establishing for itself about trapping ghosts, because there's this whole sequence leading up to the final encounter where they're kind of blowing ghosts up and they're sort of dissipating, and that's not really how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to have to trap them. And they'd already used the ghost trap earlier in the movie, so I didn't really get what they thought they were doing with the lore of the Ghostbusting universe, I don't think it made a lot of sense.
And of course they did rehash crossing the streams, didn't they? Overcomplicated explanation as to why not to do it, and then, we'll have to cross the streams, although they didn't use that terminology, they said something much less simple and clear. And as I was saying in a forum post where I was saying how I didn't like this movie, it didn't work, but they didn't die either, and what happened? It kind of worked a little bit, but not enough to actually sort things out or enough to kill them, so what really is the point?
Like I was saying, trying to do homage to the original and falling rather short. I think that's a good example of that. It's been possible to read quotes from Dan Aykroyd about this movie, blaming its lack of success and lack of spawning anything else on the director, Paul Feig, who played Mr. Poole in the first season of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So I don't know how much the directing was really to blame, or if it was just a general lot of everything falling rather short. But speaking of Dan Aykroyd reminds me of the cameos from the original actors, which again I think were rather perfunctory and not that cleverly included and could have been made more of. Dan Aykroyd appearing as a cab driver and nobody even gets in his cab. That was very disappointing. Ernie Hudson as the uncle of Patty. Of course, he has to be her uncle because they're both African American.
Yes, I mean, couldn't he play some other character not related to the one other black character in the film? That strikes me as rather racist. Why not say, Bill Murray has to be the uncle of Kate McKinnon's character?
So I did feel those were kind of missed opportunities to get some decent homage and something meaningful into the movie.
I would like to say, though, I have no objection to the pink Ecto-1. I disapprove of the way people say, ooh, no pink. Just because it's women doesn't mean we have to have pink, and pink is patronising, and they say all sorts of strange things about pink. I think whether you're a man or a woman and you want pink, you should have it, and it has been used as a symbol of female empowerment, like in the fight against breast cancer. So out of all my objections, a pink Ecto-1 is not one of them. But at any rate, it wasn't enough liked and enjoyed and money-making to have spawned any sequels, although the characters do appear in this comic that they keep on making and making and making. Various different incarnations of Ghostbusters in it, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at one stage.
So perhaps we won't be mentioning Ghostbusters again in any update podcasts, but there we go. We've been able to breathe out, get that out of the way, form some thoughts about it, and share them with you. And there is an end to our update podcast for 2018. And now, all that remains to do is to tell you what's going to happen with the Olden Days podcast in 2019. And the answer to that is we're going bi-monthly, as in a podcast every other month. In 2016, we did a podcast every 2 weeks, and we had a heck of a lot we wanted to say, and then we did say it. And then for 2 years, in 2017 and 2018, we've dedicatedly put out a podcast every month, and that's certainly an achievement to be justly proud of, I think. But now we've decided to go down to every other month, as we've got a lot of the things we chiefly wanted to podcast about done and dusted, and there are other things to podcast about, say, and to enjoy coming back to every other month to do a podcast about, but that, I think we both feel, is the right amount of podcasting to do from this point on, don't we?
Yeah.
That being the case, our next podcast will be on the final Sunday in February, and then the one after that will be the final Sunday in April, and every other month, and so on. I'm sure you get the idea. So do come back and join us on that final Sunday in February for a podcast on
the Disney Renaissance, which is the theatrical movies that they made from 1989 to 1999 inclusive.
So until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.